Hello, welcome. This lovely day. It's quite nice and sunny outside, and things are falling over. And we've had some good news this morning. So I have a new baby nephew, who's not named as of yet. So there we are. We'll get on with it, and we're still in Genesis. Morning, John. How's it going? Hiya, Dan. How's it hanging with you? We're still in Genesis, and I thought for a bit of fun, we'd look at with the dinosaurs in the Bible, and then we'll get on with Genesis 3 to 11. Now, my wife's coming down now, and I'm wondering whether she's gonna wander through or not. Hi, darling.
You on?
Yes, I am, and you have a new nephew.
Oh, what?
New nephew.
Oh, this comes in?
Yeah, he came at 5 o'clock, and he was £8.3.
Oh, fab.
So there we are. Andrea's just woken up. So, were there dinosaurs in the Bible? What does the Bible have to say about dinosaurs? Well, nothing. Here's a plain answer. Mainly because the word dinosaur wasn't invented until 1841, and it was invented by a guy called Sir Richard Owen, a British scientist, and it means terrible lizard. But really, what does the Bible have to say about dinosaurs? Were there any hints or nods to dinosaurs? Well, this isn't a part of an ongoing discussion amongst Christians, mainly saying, how old is the earth? Was it created in 7 physical days, as we know, 24 hours? Or was it created in God's days? In terms of the words used, as I've said, it doesn't actually say the word dinosaur. Instead, it uses the word tannin, which is sometimes translated as sea monster, sometimes as serpent, but most commonly is translated as dragon. And these creatures are mentioned nearly 30 times in the Old Testament, and were found both on land and in water. As well as this, some creatures are described in the Bible, and scholars believe that they are talking about dinosaurs, or at least they aren't talking about any creatures that we're aware of. In Job 40, now realizing that Job was arguably written before Genesis, it says, "Look at Behemoth, which I made along with you, and which feeds on grass like an ox. What strength it has in its loins, what power in the muscles of its belly. Its tail sways like a cedar, the sinews of its thighs are close-knit. Its bones are tubes of bronze, its limbs are like rods of iron. It ranks first amongst the works of God, yet its maker can approach it with his sword. So some scholars have tried to say that Behemoth is an elephant or a hippo. Now, an elephant and a hippo have skinny tails, not tails that are like cedar trees. However, dinosaurs like Brontosaurus and Diplodocus have tails that are huge, much more like cedar trees. Nearly every ancient civilization has some sort of art depicting huge lizards or reptilian creatures, petroglyphs, artifacts, and even clay figurines that have been found in North America, which resemble modern depictions of dinosaurs. Rock carvings in South America feature men riding Diplodocus-like creatures, and other drawings are found of Tyrannosaurus rex, pterodactyl, and other creatures. Roman mosaics, Mayan pottery, Babylonian city walls all testify to these creatures. There have also been footprints of men and dinosaurs found in the same place in the same time period in Western Central Asia. Western Central Asia? I don't know. So arguably there are dinosaurs in the Bible. It all comes down to how you interpret the available evidence and how you view the world around you. If you come to the conclusion that there are dinosaurs in the Bible, you then have to ask the question, how did they die out? Well, it's possible. Dan's asking, do you think the writers who mentioned dragons saw something like a kimono lizard? It's very possible. And it's also possible that they were bigger creatures. But who knows? As I said, you then have to ask the questions, how did they die out? Was it because of the flood? Was it before the flood? Was it after the flood? Was it because man hunted them to extinction? Well, we will have to wait and find out. Now, back onto the Bible. We're gonna chart Eden to Babel today. And when God said at the end of his creation, that's very good, he was including us. Not many people would say that the world is very good today. But what went wrong? Genesis 3 gives us the answer to that. All three relationships between humans and God, humans and nature, and humans and each other have all gone wrong. Let's look at three facts of our existence. Birth is painful, life is hard, and death is certain. Why? Why all these three things? Why are all these things relevant? Again, we get the answer in Genesis 3. Philosophers look at this and say there must be a bad God as well as a good one, or that our good God made some very bad choices. And thus they try and find some explanation for the origin of evil. Genesis 3 gives us vital insights into this problem. 1, there wasn't always evil in the world. 2, it didn't start with human beings. 3, it isn't something physical. It's something moral. Some philosophers said that it's the material part of the universe that's the source of all evil. Or, in other words, in personal terms, it's your body that's the source of temptation. This is not in the Bible either. this is not the Bible answer. Evil doesn't exist. There are only evil people. Evil isn't an entity. It's an adjective rather than a noun. It's the persons that become evil. Evil as such doesn't exist. We are dealing in Genesis 3 with a real event in real history and in real geography. Now, that may challenge lots of your opinions. And it's good to have opinions, and it's good to have them challenged, because when your opinions are challenged, you have an argument, a decision to make in your head. And I would just say, don't jump to a snap decision. Think about both sides of the argument. Well, this is a real story, and it did take place in a real garden. We're given the place and the time of it. And at the dawn of human history, a gigantic moral catastrophe took place. This is not a fable or a myth. It's an act which took place. And we start here with a reptile, more like a lizard than a snake, because it had legs at this time, a talking lizard. Now, there are three possibilities about this talking lizard. It was the devil in disguise, and we know he's the master of disguise. Or God enabled an animal to talk. Well, he did that with Balaam's ass, so that's a possibility. Or the animal was possessed by an evil spirit, i.e. Satan. Now, just before you dismiss the third, remember that the demons had entered the pigs just before they went careering off the cliff. Jesus had sent a horde of demons out of a man into a load of pigs. So it is possible for demons to possess an animal, and it's possible for Satan to take over an animal, and therefore to disguise himself as one of God's own creatures, which would tend to fool Adam and Eve, because Satan was putting himself below them to speak to them. Satan was, just to give you a little bit of information, which you probably already know, Satan was a fallen angel whose name was Lucifer. Satan is actually a title. It's not a name, it's a title. And evolutionists have real problems with angels. They are just as real as us. And they're more intelligent and they're stronger. At the end of the day, we see an angel taking on a Babylonian army, and one angel defeats 18,000 or 180,000. I'm never quite sure. Babylonians. I think it was 180,000. It's interesting that Satan went to Eve. Women are generally more trusting than men. Men are terribly distrustful. But more importantly, it was Satan who was subverting God's order of things, putting Eve, the woman, at the head of the household, and not Adam. Adam was actually standing right by her side and never opened his mouth once. And we so often see pictures of Eve with the snake and Adam's nowhere to be seen, but it actually says that Adam was standing right there. And Adam should have been arguing with Satan because Eve hadn't heard what God had said. Eve hadn't heard God's words. But Adam just stood there silent. Adam should have told Satan that he was misquoting God. There are three ways in which you can misquote God's words. You can add to his word, you can subtract from his word, and you can change what's there. And if you read this passage carefully, Satan did all three of these things. And you shouldn't tamper with God's word. Satan knows his Bible very well, and he can misquote it very well too. We know Satan got hold of Eve, and he'll get hold of us very much the same way. What, me, you say? Never, you say. Let's have a look. There are three ways in which Satan can lure you away. Put doubt in your mind, desire in your heart, and make you disobey with your will. He gets you to think about something wrong first, usually by misinterpreting God's word. And then he gets you to want it in your heart, to desire it. And after he's got your mind thinking about it, your heart starts desiring it. You're an accident waiting to happen. And when the circumstances are right, you will disobey with your own will. And that's how he got Eve. And we should have learned this lesson by now, but we haven't. And here you see another side of God's character, one that hasn't come out yet, the side that judges sin. It's the holy side of God's character. That hasn't been touched in Genesis 1 and 2. But now it comes out clearly. God hates sin. And he must deal with it. And if he's a really good God, he cannot let man get away with this badness. That's the message of Genesis 3. When God communicates in prose, he's communicating his thoughts from his mind to your mind. When he communicates in poetry, he's communicating his feelings from his heart to your heart. One verse in Genesis 1 and one verse in Genesis 2 is in poetry. And both verses are about sex. When Adam saw Eve, the first thing that went through his mind in the correct sort of translation is, wow, this is it. And these two poems in chapters 1 and 2 of Genesis are God's delight and man's delight in sexuality. But in Genesis 3, the poem reveals quite another emotion in God. It reveals anger, frustration, and irritation, or in theological terms, the wrath of God. And God feels so deeply that Eden was ruined. God knew what this would all lead to. In chapter 3, it's commonly referred to as the fall. And we see ramifications of this in Genesis 4 to 11. In Genesis 3, Adam says, wow, about Eve. And a little later, he's trying to pass it back onto God by saying, it was that woman that you gave me. When God asked Adam, where are you? He knew where Adam was. But this was almost the start of a trial. If Adam had just confessed, he would have been forgiven. This is asking, basically, do you plead innocent or guilty? And if Adam had confessed straight away, maybe things would have been very different. Instead, he tries to blame everyone. He tries to blame Eve, and he tries also to blame God in a backhanded way by saying, it's this woman who you gave me, it's her fault. God is wanting a confession, because when he gets a confession, he can forgive. The fall deserved punishment. Adam was punished in relation to his work, and Eve was punished in relation to her family, and the snake lost its legs. But they still have legs. They have little tiny legs, which are not long enough to touch the ground. So they've got a slither on their belly. So God shut them off from life. It's like watching a stone thrown into a pond and watching the ripples come off that one act. Moral pollution contaminates all culture and progress from this moment on. All art, all science, all social and all political life. And so chapters 4 to 11 covers many centuries, but God picks out the things that most affect him and his purposes. God has feelings that come out very strongly now. And God can be happy and he can be sad. He can be angry and he can be grieved. We are going to look at his emotional reaction of what happened on earth. We will cover now 3 significant acts, 3 significant things that God wrote about. Cain and his weapons of mass destruction and what came from that line. Noah and his ark, and Nimrod and his tower. Oh, excuse me. And these 3 events cover many centuries of human history. But these 3 events are the most significant events to God. And what he was going to do with our fallen human race. Cain killed Abel because of envy. The same reason the Jews killed Jesus. Cain was called Gotten. That's basically the meaning of his name. Gotten. Because Eve said, I've gotten him from the Lord. And Abel was called Vapor. God often favoured the younger because he never wanted anyone to think that they had the natural right to his gifts and inheritance. God often chose the younger, but that wasn't why he chose to accept Abel's sacrifice and not Cain's. Abel had learned from his parents that the only sacrifice that was worthy to offer was a blood sacrifice. Blood was shed so that Adam and Eve's shame could be covered. God did this. God made the first fur coat, shock horror, to cover Adam and Eve. Blood was shed so that their shame could be covered. That was a principle that began right there and goes all the way through to Calvary. And Abel understood that. That's why God accepted his sacrifice and didn't accept Cain's. Cain's sacrifice was basically a harvest supper. And God respected Abel's sacrifice, which in turn made Cain angry. Cain was jealous. And God warned Cain. He said, you are in a precarious position Sin is knocking at your door, and it's just waiting to pounce and get you. But Cain didn't listen, and you know the rest of the story. Andrea,
Well,
you snoring?
oh, I was dreaming of Beth.
Cain lured Abel away from the house. Sorry. Killed him and buried him, and then totally disowned him and said he had nothing to do with it. There's a pattern emerging. The bad people hate good people, and ungodly people hate or are envious of godly people. And this will cause a division that goes right through human history. Plato said, if there was ever a perfectly good man lived on earth, he would be crucified. And that was said centuries before Christ came. We live in a fallen world where goodness is hated, where people say no one's perfect as an excuse for the evil that they do. Anyone who presents a challenge to someone's conscience is hated. Just look at Jesus. Jesus said, the world hated me, and if you live right, the world will hate you too. Jesus said, the blood of the righteous has been spilled from Abel right the way through to Zechariah. Cain bore an unholy line, which spawned music, metallurgy. The first metal forged came out of his line, and so did weapons of mass destruction, which enabled unlimited revenge and terrorism to begin. All of this is covered in the book of Enoch, which isn't in the Bible. It was removed from the Bible, but it's still. If you read the book of Enoch, it's sort of the missing link, in a lot of ways. It was Cain's line that began to build cities. And what does a city do? It concentrates sinners in one place, thus concentrating sin in one place. Cities, therefore, became more sinful than the countryside. All the things we call human progress are tainted by Cain. The mark of Cain is on them. However wonderful our progress gets, it's always tainted by killing. The tragedy is that almost every invention of man has been used for killing somewhere down the line. Some inventions have been used to kill before they are used for healthy purposes. Splitting the atom, case in point. Polygamy came from Cain's line. Until that point, one man and one woman had been married, but Cain's line brought in polygamy, and it was such a common thing that Abraham and Isaac and David all succumbed to polygamy. Through Cain's line, many wives came in. There was, however, a third son had by Adam and Eve, called Seth, who had a godly line. And from the line of Seth, men began to call on the name of God. So we live in a world of two lines, a line of Cain and a line of Seth. And you choose which line you belong to and which kind of life you want to live. Cain said, I am not my brother's keeper. But God said, no, I am. And his blood is crying out to me. Every murder involves God. He is concerned because it's a murder of his family. That was the first major thing in God's history. The next was Noah and his ark. There are many cultures in the world that talk about the flood in ancient times. Now, the flood could have covered the whole earth, or it could have covered the parts of the known world in the area around Mesopotamia. That huge plain through which the Tigris and the Euphrates flow, that's where the known world was at this time. Why did the flood happen? Because basically God regretted that he'd made human beings. And that has to be the saddest verse in the whole Bible. What happened to make God feel this way? When in Genesis 6, it talks of the sons of God falling in love with human women, and they had sex with them, and thus the Nephilim were created. The Nephilim is a word that was created for this hybrid of human beings. And we see in the book of Enoch, angels were sent down to watch and take care of men, around 250 of them, in the area of Mount Hermon. And the book of Enoch is actually quoted in the New Testament a number of times. It's quoted in Jude. Jesus quotes from it. And therefore we know it's true. It was taken out of the Bible a long time ago, but it's interestingly still in the Ethiopian Bible. So the only thing that I can think of is that when Andrew met the Ethiopian on the road, and the Ethiopian had a Bible, he took that Bible away and the book of Enoch was taken out sometime later. That's my summation. I could be completely wrong. But angels having sex with women was not in God's order. This abomination of angels having sex with women was the beginning of occultism. We can trace occultism back to this event, and the angels taught the women sacred secrets of the angels. The angels actually taught women witchcraft, and this is also documented in the book of Enoch. The result of this perversion was that violence filled the earth. God saw that every imagination of man's heart was only evil continually. And these were God's people. These were the people made in the image of God. And every one of them was wanting evil continually in his heart. Can you imagine how God felt at that point? But being God, he was very patient. God warned them first with the prophet, and Enoch was the first prophet. He was the first person to give a warning to the human race from God. And the message was God is coming to judge, and he's going to deal with this ungodliness. And Enoch was given a son at the age of 65. And God gave Enoch the boy's name, and it was this: when he dies, it will happen. But the name was a Hebrew name, and it was Methuselah. And that is why Methuselah lived longer than anybody else, purely down to God's mercy, 969 years. So God gave the people 1,000 years to get themselves sorted, and they didn't. So when somebody says to you, oh, well, the story of Noah, God just gets ticked off with people and sends a flood. No, God didn't just get ticked off with people. He gave people 1,000 years to put themselves right. 1,000 years of people talking to them and people telling them this is not God's way. 1,000 years to sort their lives out. And yet they didn't. Enoch knew that when his son died, God would judge the world. And the day he died, it began to rain. And Methuselah's grandson, Enoch's grandson rather, no, Methuselah's grandson, had 3 sons. His name was Noah. And at this point, Noah was 500 years old when he had 3 sons. And some people say that Noah built the ark in 12 months. I'm not so sure. At the most, he would have had 4 men working on it. And it would have taken him much longer to build a boat of that size and scale. Anyway, it says that he was 600 years old when the rains came. I reckon that it took him 20 or 30 years building a huge covered boat according to God's specifications. And interestingly, HMS Canberra was built to God's specifications for the ark, because the guy designing it reckoned on God knowing his way around the oceans, so he built it from there. Can you imagine building a boat the size of HMS Canberra in 12 months? It doesn't seem right to me. And there was a preacher, his wife, 3 sons and 3 daughters-in-law, and they lived the godly way. They preached and practiced righteousness, and they were laughed at. What are you building a ship here miles from the sea for? And Noah said, well, the sea will come to the ship. After the flood, God promised never to do it again, as long as the earth remained. He made a covenant with the whole human race that he would never again destroy the human race, but also that he would support the human race by providing the food enough for everyone. God placed a rainbow in the sky as a reminder of his promise, and it's a reminder to him of his promise, not to us. It's a reminder to him. The 2 things we need for life are light and water, so that when they come together, you see a rainbow. He also demanded something of us, to treat human life as sacred and punish murder with execution. There is always enough food in the world to feed the whole population of the world. It's not his fault that it doesn't get around to everybody in the world. It's ours. It's our greed. In the year of the Ethiopian famine, there was 13% more corn in the world than was needed, but we just wouldn't give it away. As I said, it's not his fault. It's ours. We are just too selfish. The next incident that affected God deeply was Babel, and a man named Nimrod, a mighty hunter of people as well as animals, a man who went to war as an aggressor. He had ambitions for humanity, ambitions for himself, to build a tower that reached to God's sphere of heaven, to challenge heaven, to build a name, a reputation for himself. The towers were called ziggurats, and they were brick towers. They weren't stone. They didn't have any stone in those parts of the world. And they were great big towers with staircases going up and up. And on top, they usually had signs of astrology. But it wasn't for worshipping stars that the tower was built. It was to express Nimrod's grandeur. The Tower of Babel offended God deeply. And he said, if I let them go on building for themselves like this, there's no ending, no telling where it will end. So God gave people the gift of tongues. This was the first time he gave people the gift of tongues. Lots of tongues, so they couldn't understand each other. And so men split. You can see how the fallen Adam spreads like ripples in the pond, and still does. And still more than before, there is human pride. We can do without God, or so they say. We see two things in these chapters. We see God's justice. He always deals with the situation. He always punishes. He punished Adam and Eve and Cain. He punished the generation of Enoch. He didn't punish Enoch. He has to keep his word and to be a good God. And we need to remember that at any time, God could wipe out the human race. And one day he will. One day it'll happen. And once more, God's anger will boil over and the human race will be destroyed. Jesus predicts it and uses Noah as a reference. As in the days of Noah, so it will be in the coming of the Son of Man. And alongside his justice, we see his mercy. With Adam and Eve, he made them clothes to hide their shame. With Cain, he put a mark on his forehead so that Cain wouldn't be killed. He had the line of Seth running through mankind. Noah and his family were among them. And through them, God was going to save the world. We see a conflict for God. How should he react? Justice or mercy? And it goes all the way through the Old Testament and is only resolved at the cross, where heaven's justice and mercy meet. That is when it is resolved. There was incidentally a people who after Babel went over the mountains and settled when they met the sea. They took the pictorial language because the alphabet hadn't been started to be written then. They formed the Chinese people, and their language tells the story of the first 11 chapters in the Bible perfectly. Their word for create is made up of mud, the symbol for mud, the symbol for life or motion, and someone walking. Their word for devil is the symbol for man or son, the symbol for garden, and the symbol for secret or private. And a secret person in the garden is what they call the devil. The word for tempter is the symbol for devil plus 2 trees and a covering. The symbol for boat is the symbol for a container, 8, and a mouth or person. So a boat that contains 8 people. When they first went to China, they only believed in one God, the maker of heaven and earth. And it was only after Confucius and Buddha that this changed. So the Chinese language is an independent confirmation from outside the Bible that these things happened and were taken in the memory of people and scattered at Babel. And this ended up being scattered as far as China. Well, the next time we'll have a look at Abraham, Isaac and Jacob. But I hope you've enjoyed, and if you've got any questions, as normal, put your questions down below in the comments and I'll try and answer them. God bless you, have a great day, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.